The rancher ordered a bride, but a famous prostitute walked off the wagon. The prairie stretched wide and endless beneath the sky painted with strokes of fire orange and dusty gold, the kind of sunset that made even the loneliest heart ache with the weight of eternity. And out there on the rolling land sat Elijah Kane's ranch, miles of fence and open field that he had built with the strength of his own back and the silence of a man who carried too many nights alone. He was a man of broad shoulders and steady hands, respected by cowboys, feared by outlaws, but underneath the grit in his voice and the shadow in his eyes lay a hunger that no amount of cattle or coin could cure. The hunger for someone to share the silence with, someone who could make his empty house a home, someone whose laughter might echo in the wooden halls the way his boots did at night. So when he sent a letter back east and paid for a mail-order bride, it wasn't out of desperation but out of the quiet courage of a man tired of burying his hope under hard work. And so the town whispered of the wagon that was due to arrive, carrying the woman who would be his wife, and the townsfolk gathered near the dusty street that evening, children tugging at their mothers' skirts, cowhands leaning against posts with curiosity burning in their eyes, and Elijah, standing tall in his cleanest shirt, tried to swallow the storm rising in his chest, for he had dreamed of this moment on too many sleepless nights, imagining a shy but kind woman stepping down, her bonnet low, her eyes hopeful, the kind of woman who would see through the silence and find the man beneath the steel. But when the wagon rolled in, rattling over the stones, and the horses drew to a stop in front of the saloon, the door swung open, and out of the shadow descended not the modest bride he had ordered, but a woman who made the entire street freeze as though the air had been knocked out of their lungs, for she carried with her a reputation louder than any introduction, a name that had been spoken in whispers across the frontier. Scarlett Monroe, the most notorious beauty of Dodge City, a woman draped in crimson silk, with hair the color of midnight and lips painted as though they had tasted every secret the world could offer, her steps slow and deliberate like a queen who knew the weight of every man's stare. And as her heels clicked against the wood, silence broke into a wave of murmurs. The women gasped, the men adjusted their hats, and Elijah felt his heart stumble inside his chest, for this was no blushing bride. This was scandal wrapped in satin, temptation personified, the very last soul he would have imagined fate dragging to his doorstep. And yet here she was, holding the letter that bore his name, the proof that she had been sent in place of the woman he had dreamed of. And though part of him burned with anger at being deceived, another part, deep and dangerous, felt a pull he could not explain, as though the earth itself had shifted the moment she looked at him with eyes that were not ashamed, not timid, but fierce, tired, and begging for something no man in that street had ever thought she would dare to seek. Redemption, belonging, perhaps even love, though the word felt too fragile in the heat of that moment. And so the story of Elijah Kane and Scarlett Monroe began, not with the sweetness of expectation fulfilled, but with the collision of two broken souls beneath the endless western sky. And as the murmurs grew and the sheriff narrowed his eyes, Elijah stepped forward, his jaw set, his heart pounding like hooves across dry earth, torn between rejecting what destiny had delivered and reaching for the one woman who could set his world on fire in ways he had never imagined. Elijah stood frozen for a heartbeat longer than he should have, the eyes of the entire town burning into his back as Scarlett Monroe, with her crimson dress catching the light of the fading sun, tilted her chin and waited for him to close the distance. And though his pride screamed that he should turn his back, demand an explanation, or send her away on the next wagon out, something in her gaze stopped him cold, something raw and unguarded beneath the paint and perfume, a flicker of weariness, of longing, of a woman who had been traded as a commodity all her life and who, for once, wanted to be chosen for more than what she could offer in a darkened room. And Elijah, against the warnings in his own mind, reached out his hand to help her down the last step, his rough palm brushing against her delicate fingers, sending a current through them both that neither spoke of. And when her heels touched the dirt, the town erupted in whispers, women dragging their children inside, men chuckling under their breath. But Scarlett stood tall, her reputation preceding her presence undeniable, and she looked straight into Elijah's eyes as though daring him to reject her publicly. daring him to prove that she was nothing more than a scandal unworthy of a man's honor. Yet Elijah, though his chest ached with disappointment at the lost dream of a modest wife, found his voice and said, low and steady, "You best come with me." And without another word he guided her toward his horse, the tension in the air thick enough to choke on, the sheriff's eyes following every step, the townsfolk's judgment hanging like a storm cloud. And as they rode toward the ranch, silence stretched between them, broken only by the rhythm of hooves on dirt and the wind pulling strands of Scarlett's dark hair free from her hat. And Elijah wondered what kind of God would twist fate so cruelly as to send him not the comfort he prayed for, but a woman who embodied every temptation he had sworn to avoid. Yet when he stole a glance at her, expecting arrogance or mockery, he caught her staring out at the wide horizon with eyes full of something else entirely. Sadness, yes, but also hunger. The same kind of hunger he knew well. The hunger for belonging, for a home, for something untainted by the mistakes that chained them both. And in that silent recognition lay the seed of a connection neither of them dared name. The ranch loomed ahead, strong and solitary, and when they arrived, Elijah dismounted and helped her down again, his calloused hand lingering a moment longer than it should have. And though his pride warred with his compassion, he led her inside, showing her the wide wooden rooms that smelled of pine and smoke, rooms waiting for a woman's touch. And Scarlett, for all her bravado, paused in the doorway, her fingers brushing the table, the mantel, the chair by the fire, as though she had stepped into a world she never believed could be hers. And she whispered, almost too soft for him to hear, "It's quiet. I don't remember the last time I had quiet." And those words pierced him deeper than any blade, for beneath the paint and the silk was not just a notorious beauty but a woman broken by noise, by men, by the endless demands of survival. And Elijah, against every wall he had built, felt the first crack appear. Yet he could not let her see it, not yet. So he spoke gruffly, telling her she would sleep in the spare room, that come morning they would figure out what in God's name to do about this arrangement. But that night, as he lay awake listening to the unfamiliar sound of another's breath in his house, he realized that though she was not the woman he ordered, she might be the woman fate intended. And that thought both terrified and thrilled him, for if he let her into his heart, she could ruin him, or she could save him, in ways no one else ever could. And so, as the stars burned cold over the prairie and the crickets sang, Elijah Kane and Scarlett Monroe began their uneasy truce, two souls scarred by the choices of their past yet bound by a destiny neither of them had chosen. And though the town would whisper, though the shadows of judgment would press against their every step, in the quiet of that lonely ranch began a story of fire and tenderness, of redemption and love, the kind of story that could only be written beneath the endless western sky where hearts were tested like steel in the forge. And as their journey unfolded, it would teach them both that sometimes the love you never ordered is the love that was always meant to arrive. And dear listener, if you've been carried away by this tale of unexpected love and redemption under the wide western sky, make sure you subscribe to this channel so you don't miss the next chapter of their story, because just like Elijah and Scarlett, sometimes the next step in the journey is the one that changes everything forever. The first light of dawn spilled across the prairie in a soft golden haze, the kind of morning that promised both beauty and hardship. And inside Elijah Kane's ranch house the air was heavy with the unfamiliar presence of another soul. For Scarlett Monroe, the infamous woman who had descended from the wagon in a storm of whispers and scandal, now stood barefoot by the window of the spare room, watching the horizon as though it held secrets only she could read, her crimson dress folded neatly over a chair, her hair falling loose down her back, stripped of the glamour she carried into town. And in that fragile light she looked less like a notorious prostitute and more like a woman caught between two worlds, a woman desperate to outrun the ghosts of her past but too proud to let anyone see her stumble. Elijah rose early, as he always did, pulling on his boots, his heart thundering with the knowledge that today he must face her not as a mistake delivered by fate but as a flesh and blood woman living under his roof. And when he stepped into the kitchen he found her there already, trying clumsily to start a fire in the stove, cursing softly under her breath when the kindling refused to catch. And though his instinct was to laugh at her fumbling, He saw instead the determination etched across her face, a woman who had lived her life being judged for what she was, now trying to prove she could be something more, and against his will a flicker of respect stirred in him. Without a word, he took the flint from her trembling hand, struck a spark, and lit the fire with the ease of years, then stepped back, his eyes steady on her as he said, "Out here, fire doesn't come easy. You got to know its stubbornness." And Scarlet, instead of shrinking under his tone, lifted her chin and met his gaze with a sharpness that made his chest tighten, replying, "So do I, rancher. I know something about stubbornness." The silence that followed was thick, but it wasn't empty. It was charged, alive, and when he turned away to pour water from the pitcher, he realized his house no longer felt hollow. It felt challenged, alive in a way it hadn't been in years. Word spread quickly through town that Elijah Kane had brought Scarlett Monroe into his home, and by midday the whispers had grown into a storm. Shopkeepers shaking their heads, churchgoers praying louder, cowhands chuckling at the audacity, and though Elijah paid them no mind, he knew the weight of their judgment pressed hard against Scarlett, for when they rode into town that afternoon to collect supplies, the stares were colder than steel, the women shielding their children's eyes, the men tipping hats with smirks that carried more insult than respect, and Scarlett, though she held her head high, clutched the reins tighter than necessary, her knuckles white, and Elijah, watching her from the corner of his eye, realized that for all her strength she was also bracing against a loneliness he knew too well. Inside the general store, the shopkeeper's wife refused to greet her, speaking only to Elijah as though Scarlett were invisible, and when Scarlett reached for a bolt of fabric, the woman snatched it away, muttering about shame, and Elijah's jaw clenched so hard it ached, his temper sparking like dry tinder, and though Scarlett's lips curved into a practiced smile, her eyes betrayed the sting of humiliation, and Elijah, unable to stand the cruelty, slammed his coin down and declared loud enough for all to hear, "She's with me." That's all anyone needs to know, and in that moment something shifted in Scarlett, something deep, for no man had ever claimed her in defense. Not like that, not as though her worth extended beyond the silk she wore or the whispers she carried, and as they rode back to the ranch, the air between them was heavy, but not with anger, with something new, something fragile, like the first fragile shoots of green after a long winter, and though neither spoke it, they both knew that the story unfolding between them was no longer about a rancher who ordered a bride and a prostitute who walked off the wagon, but about two broken souls daring to test whether love could bloom in the harshest soil. That night the wind howled across the prairie like a restless spirit, rattling the shutters and stirring up every shadow of doubt inside Elijah's chest, and yet when he stepped into the kitchen he found Scarlett sitting by the fire, her face illuminated by its glow, no crimson silk, no painted lips, only a woman stripped bare of the world's expectations, her eyes reflecting the flames as though she were trying to burn away everything she had been. And when she spoke her voice carried no seduction, no bravado, only truth. "I wasn't meant to come here, you know. They sent me because I had no place left, no man willing to keep me, no city that wanted me, and when I saw your name on that letter, I thought maybe, just maybe, a ranch in the middle of nowhere could be the place where I stopped running." And Elijah, a man who had buried his heart beneath years of silence, felt the weight of her confession strike deeper than any bullet, because he knew what it was to run, to work until his hands bled just to keep loneliness from eating him alive, and he crossed the room slowly, every step heavy with choice, until he stood before her and said, "You came here as a mistake, but mistakes have a way of showing us what we need most." And when her eyes lifted to his, wet with the tears she refused to let fall, the air between them cracked open with a vulnerability neither had dared share with another soul. Days turned into weeks, and the ranch began to change. Scarlett learned to cook over the stubborn fire, to mend torn shirts, to ride fences with grit that surprised even the hands, and though the town still whispered, their voices grew quieter when they saw her working dawn to dusk beside Elijah, her silk traded for calico, her painted nails for blisters, and soon the same women who scorned her began to soften when they saw her tending to a sick child outside the church. her touch gentle, her laughter genuine, and though her past was never erased, it began to matter less than the woman she was becoming. Elijah, too, found himself changing, his house no longer echoing with emptiness but with Scarlett's humming, her footsteps, her quiet presence that steadied him after long days on the range. And one evening, as the sun bled across the horizon, he found her out by the corral watching the foals run, her hair catching the light like fire, and he walked up behind her, his voice low but certain. I thought I wanted a bride out of a catalog, a woman shaped by someone else's idea of perfect, but what I needed was you. And Scarlett, breath trembling, turned to him, her hands hesitating before she let them rest against his chest, and whispered, and I thought no man would ever see me as more than what I've been. But you do. And in that sacred hush beneath the wide western sky, Elijah bent and kissed her, not with the hunger of a man for a woman's body but with the reverence of a soul finding its missing piece, and the kiss sealed a promise neither of them needed words to confirm, that love had come not in the way they expected, but in the way they needed most. The months that followed were not without trial. The town still tested them, storms still battered the land, and ghosts of the past still whispered in Scarlett's quiet moments. But together they stood stronger than they ever could have alone. And by the time winter's first snow dusted the ranch, the house no longer felt like Elijah's fortress of solitude. It felt like their home, a place where two wounded souls had found healing, and the prairie, endless and wild, bore witness to a story of redemption written not in ink but in the fire of endurance and the tenderness of love. And so the tale of the rancher who ordered a bride but was sent a famous prostitute did not end in scandal or shame, but in the triumph of grace, the kind of love that remakes broken people into something whole, the kind of story that lingers long after the last page is turned, reminding us that sometimes the person you never expected is the one God always intended. And dear friend, if this story of redemption and unexpected love has touched your heart beneath the endless western sky, I invite you to subscribe to this channel, because there are more journeys, more romances, and more tales of hope yet to come, and you won't want to miss the next one.